Welcome to this week's edition of Coach Prep. Coach Don and I are together in the Cherokee Batting Range podcast studio, getting ready to record episode number 169. We're going to talk about an old saying where players don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. But before we talk about that, let's talk about our sponsors. First, the Anderson Bat Company. Everything Fast Pitch is very proud to have Anderson Bat Company as our presenting sponsor. Anderson Bat Company is using the latest and greatest bat technology to corner the market in the fast pitch world. They have the -9 Rocket Tech, the -10 Carbon, and the -11 Carbon Light. Anderson Bat Company is using this technology to put a high-performing bat in the hands of hitters that really know the difference between a good bat and a great bat. We're also working with Anderson to provide a discount for all of our listeners. Go to the Anderson Bat Company website and order your bats. Use the EFP20 discount, which is for everything fast pitch, and you'll get a 20% discount. It's a great way for you to save a little bit of money on a great bat and also help support everything fast pitch at the same time. Speaking of supporting everything fast pitch, we need more patrons. Folks, come on board. We definitely need your help. Go to patreon.com/everythingfastpitch. We're talking about $5, $10, or $20 a month. It's going to go a long way towards helping us keep this podcast afloat. We've been talking about it for months now. We still are operating in the red. We have made progress. We're going in the right direction, but we definitely need more people to support us if they can. So if you see value in what we're doing, come on board, become a patron. Go to patreon.com/everythingfastpitch.
I was going to say, Tori, if you enjoy the podcast, just jump in and help us out. $5.
Really does make a big difference. The whole idea is if a whole bunch of people would give a little, we could keep this thing going forever. The reality is if we don't have some more people jump in and give a little, somewhere out on the horizon, the last podcast is going to get announced. And I don't want to think about that because I have too much fun getting together to do it.
Yep.
So, Don, one of the sayings that I heard as a young coach, at first I don't know I gave it the weight that it really deserves, but now as I've gotten older and thought about it a lot more, is that players don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And now, one of the things that I think is really true about this is I used to think that it was really true about female athletes more than male athletes, but now I think it's really true about all athletes.
Just people? Yeah.
People in general. You can have an encyclopedic knowledge of the game. You can be the greatest motivator, the greatest teacher of skills, the greatest strategist, all that stuff. But if at the end of the day, your players feel like they're just a commodity to you, they're just an afterthought, they're just a necessary evil, whatever word you want to put in there to kind of describe your relationship with them, I think we're definitely missing the boat, because I've seen an awful lot of examples where the other direction is true, where when players know that the coaches really care about them, how much harder they'll work, how much more they'll give, and how much more committed they're going to be to the success of the team.
Tori, I think that's so true and so right, because all the groups that we've been around over the years, the feeling that you have when you feel like it's family, like they do care, like everybody's in it together, and these team building things that we do, I think all that stuff has huge value, and I know that I'm a lot more likely to dig in and go for somebody that I feel has a genuine interest in me.
Right.
Not just like you said as just an athlete, but me as a person. And when we have that type of relationship, I think that it goes a long way in training, which, turns into better production on the field and being more athletic. So I think it's huge. And like you said, you don't get it until you get a little bit older.
Right.
You can express this concept and idea to younger people, athletes and coaches, but if you'll listen to the old coaches, I think you'll benefit a lot.
Right. Well, one of the things that I think we get hung up on is everybody's trying to avoid the appearance of any kind of favoritism. And what ends up happening then is I think that we get it in our head that means we have to treat every player the same. And one of the things that kind of goes along with this idea is that treating players the right way, treating players fairly, does not necessarily always equal treating all players the same. Knowing how much you care, part of this, if you care enough about your players that you really are invested in them, you know a little bit about them, you know a little bit of their background, you kind of know their history, the background story a little bit more, that you're so much more likely to be able to come up with an effective way to work with them, to coach them, and to get more out of them. I know we all like being around people that are clearly invested in us, that are that care about us. But I think for a lot of coaches, they're so worried about, well, if I pat Don on the back, but I yell at Tori, that means that everybody's going to think that Don's my favorite. Well, yelling at Tori might mean that I know enough about him and his personality and his demeanor that that's the best way for me to get his attention and get him to work harder. Whereas Don's situation is really different. He needs a shoulder, an arm on the shoulder, a pat on the back, atta baby, you'll get it kind of thing more often. And so, for coaches, where this really pays off is that once your players start to know that you see them as individually and important people, that they're going to be that much more committed to the team and that much more committed to working hard to try to, I guess, repay that effort that you're making and investment that you're making in them.
No, I really like what you said there, Tori, and how you said it, because I think it's super important as well. And you had a topic for us a couple weeks back about taking some time to get the backstory on kids, to do your homework, to find out how to best suit your coaching style for the kids that you do have on your roster. And I think that's super important. And I think when I say super important too, it's just to get the most out of the time that we spend together. I think that's going to be most beneficial.
Well, a perfect example, one of the players that I'm working with now, at first blush, she just seems like your typical high school kid. And over the last couple of years now, I've gotten to know more and more. Her backstory, her family history is one of the more complicated, holy cow kinds of things that I can remember, in all these years of coaching, the different twists and turns that have happened in her family life, the loss and the struggle and all that kind of stuff. The thought to me is, if I'm a high school coach or a travel ball coach, and I think that player's situation is just like everybody else's,
they're all the same.
I'm really missing the boat because now that I know what I know, even just the interactions that she and I have in training, when she comes in for a 30-minute lesson, because of my awareness now, I think I say things a little bit differently. I'm a little bit more
selected.
And thoughtful.
Yeah.
I think thoughtful is really the right word in how I present something. There's something else that I might crack a joke about with somebody else, or say something that's innocent and doesn't mean anything at all, that I certainly could
be taken differently,
right, because of her history. I just think it's worth the investment. And again, because then I think what happens is that it allows you to show that you care in many different ways. It can be in adjusting the way you're working with a player at practice. It can be in asking questions about how things are going. It can be the pat on the back and the, hey, if you ever need help, if you ever need somebody to talk to, I'm here. It can be the
level and tone and the way we say
behind
things.
The scenes coordinating that somebody else gives her a ride and picks her up for practice because, that's something that's really a struggle. The family can't afford to go on all the trips, so you kind of find somebody behind the scenes to be that adopted foster parent kind of thing, and figure out a way behind the scenes to have everybody kick in an extra $10 or whatever so that kid can participate in the big team dinners when the team goes out because they don't have the financial situation to be able to support it. Whatever it is, the more you know, the more you can do, and the more you target specifically what you're doing for what each player needs, I think the more successful you're going to be. And ultimately, whether it means you win more games or not, the impact that you're making on that kid is potentially life-changing. We all hear stories all the time. There's a sort of the example of all examples on HBO Real Sports right now. There's this episode about a player who was a walk-on at Michigan State basketball. His name's Matt Ishbia, I believe is his last name. From that humble beginning of being a player that maybe got to play the last 30, 40 seconds in a game once in a while, to becoming one of the biggest boosters and supporters of Michigan State athletics.
Wow, yeah.
Because the relationship he had with Coach Izzo and how much of an impact he had on him and how much he learned from being on that team guided him to have this amazing, successful life after basketball. And because of his feeling of, I learned how to do all this stuff because my coach cared so much about me and was willing to invest so much in me, even though I was a walk-on kid that wasn't really going to have much to do with the success or wins or losses. When you see something like that, it kind of like, hey, it does make a difference. And so, I think that for all of our coaches, it's important to always keep in mind, it's up to you to take the time to invest the effort, to ask a few questions, to get to know the players that you're coaching to the point that for sure they know you care about them as a person. And if they know you care about them as a person, they're going to care a lot more about what you think about them as a player.
Right. Well, and then they're even more ready to absorb all the softball stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
cool.
So players want to know you care. They don't care how much you know until they know that you care. Lifelong lesson that I think would really serve all our coaches well. So That's going to wrap up episode number 169. Make sure you go to fastpitchprep.com, order our Square Cuts training discs there. If you have ideas, suggestions, comments, you want to make a Player of the Week nomination, fastpitchprep@gmail.com or everythingfastpitch@gmail.com. Make sure you support our sponsors, the Anderson Bat Company, and become a patron if you can. Patreon.com/everythingfastpitch. So for Coach Don McKinley, our producer Stan Lewis, this is Coach Torrey saying thanks for listening. We'll talk to you again next week.